This story has always bothered me. In my head, I knew what I saw, but at the same time, it felt so unreal. When I was around 10 years old, I was invited to a sleepover for the first time at my friend's house. This friend, whom I'll call Abby, lives pretty far away from me, so us hanging out always felt like a special occasion. I had just started becoming brave enough to sleep away from my parents, and because she was one of my oldest friends, Abby's house was going to be one of these trial-run sleepovers. A little about Abby's family. She's the youngest of 4 kids. Her oldest brother, who is about 10 years older than us, has pretty severe autism and continues to live full-time with Abby's parents. He was always a bit of a wild card, and I, as a 10-year-old girl, always felt a little anxious around him. Anyway, there were 3 of us girls at this slumber party. We decided to sleep on the main floor so that we could stay up late watching movies that would eventually lull us to sleep. I had chosen the couch that was perpendicular to the wall of windows, looking out onto Abby's deck and backyard. The other girls had sat up on the floor, on a mattress together. They were cousins. We threw on a DVD and we fell asleep quickly. Sleeping away from home has never been easy for me. I woke up frequently and sometimes can't fall asleep at all to begin with. The night was one of those times where, after clocking a solid 2 hours, something stirred me back to consciousness. Coming to, I noticed the bright light of the TV glowing first before my eyes adjusted, and noticed something outside that wasn't there before. It was a person. A man, actually. He was sitting in one of those deck chairs and had positioned it to face directly towards where the 3 of us were sleeping. He hadn't noticed that I was awake, but seeing him made my heart race. I stayed totally still, watching him. It was dark, and so his features were a bit ambiguous, but I could tell he was studying us and smirking. Terrified, I watched him for a few minutes before turning myself into the couch cushion and closing my eyes. Some time passed, maybe a few minutes, maybe half an hour. Finally, I mustered up the courage to look again, and he was gone. To this day, I have no idea who it was watching us sleeping in the middle of the night, but the image of him sitting there, grinning, still haunts me. For a while, I thought it may have been her brother, but the guy had dark hair and dark eyes, and her brother was blonde. Luckily, we all made it to the next morning unharmed, but that was the last time I ever spent the night at Abby's house. My friend and I were followed into the forest by a creepy laughing woman. I'll preface this by saying that we were 12 and 13 at the time, and my friend and I often snuck out of our homes during sleepovers for late night walks. This was the basis of this terrifying encounter, and it stopped us from ever sneaking out after dark again. My friend lived opposite a huge forest, so our house was the preferred choice for us to roam around at night, because the forest was more scary and thrilling, and we always took flashlights, food, and blankets, so we could camp out for a couple of hours before going back home again. Well, on this fateful night, we inadvertently fell asleep instead of staying awake, so when my friend suddenly yelled at me, it was past 3 a.m., a lot later than when we usually snuck out. We grabbed our essentials and creeped out of the back door into the cold and dark night. Frost crunched underfoot as we crossed a deserted road, and as we reached the entrance to the forest, we noticed how pitch black and completely silent it was. Unnervingly so, we turned on our torches and stepped onto the uneven path into the forest, the light illuminating the trees, swaying in the icy wind. We stepped on fallen sudden leaves and bark as we made unsteady, but familiar way into our favorite part of the forest, our cold breath, the only noise to invade the deafening silence. We reached a small hut made entirely of sticks, purely for the purpose of having some shelter. There were times that vandals or other kids managed to damage our hut, but for the most part, it stayed intact. But on this occasion, I was completely destroyed. like a harbinger of a worse to come. We were just deciding to call it a night and come back later on that day to repair the hut when we heard it, this loud and shrieking giggle that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My friend and I jumped in shock and looked at each other, frightened to death. We were completely freaked out. The eerie and unnatural giggle rang out again, contradicting the silence and making my body break out in goosebumps. "Someone is here," my friend whispered to me, looking utterly terrified. "We have to go now." Her voice of rationale made it even more scary and unnerving to me that someone was in the forest with us at 3 o'clock in the morning. We just looked at each other in assent and took off running in unison, our footsteps navigating the path as naturally as we could from our muscle memory, our uneven breaths of air punctuating the giggling that seemed to be following us, getting closer and closer. Our torch's light went up and down, illuminating random patches of the trees and the bushes as we finally saw a small sliver of light as we came into the forest entrance. Running out of the forest, we didn't stop until we reached the back door of my friend's house and almost collapsed in the breathless heap of relief that we're safe. Then my friend's eyes went wide, and she nudged me, pointing a shaky finger across the road. A haggard woman of an indeterminate age, giggling that awful and horrifying giggle, and was waving over at us. We screamed and ran inside and looked out of my friend's bedroom window through the smallest gap in the curtain and could see the woman standing there. Worse yet, she was staring right at us, as if she knew we were there. We could tell she was still giggling that hideous, appalling laugh. She turned very slowly and walked back into the forest again. We never went back to that forest, nor went out after dark again. Creepy cult encounter. This took place around 15 years ago. I would have been about 13 years old. My dad has always taken an annual fishing trip with friends that would put him out of state for about a week. While he was gone on said fishing trips, I have numerous stories about weird things happening, from paranormal events to someone attempting to break into our house. But this one is the most unnerving to people when I tell it. When my dad would go on these trips, I would usually sleep in my parents' bed. My mom and I treated it like a little sleepover, and we would watch movies, stay up late, and gossip. I remember falling asleep after a late night movie and being roused from sleep from what felt like just a few minutes later. My mom is a light sleeper, while on the other hand, it takes a catastrophic level event to wake me up from a dead sleep. I remember waking up feeling as if something was wrong. The room was illuminated oddly, and there was a distant rhythm I was only partially aware of. I'm half asleep, and as I open my eyes, I can see my mom on the top of the bed, on her knees, peering out of the window above her bed. I start to ask what's going on when she turned to me quickly and shushed me. I quietly joined her, looking at the small box window that was slightly cracked open, and the distant, rhythmic chanting became more and more clear. Our house sat in front of a strip of woods. The trees aren't too thick, and you can see through most of the wooded area. The chanting was getting louder by the second, and the odd illuminations finally made sense. You could see a line of hooded fingers in dark clothes, holding torches and marching east, chanted what sounded like demonic, dark things. It felt surreal and scary as we held our breath, waiting to see what they would do. Were they headed toward the houses to burn them down? Were they going to attempt to break in and sacrifice us? Watching this line of people walk through the woods, it felt like we sat there for ages, their torches raised high and their chanting continuing through the night. But that was it. They just walked away. After what was probably more like 2 minutes, my mom and I laid back down and discussed what we saw, trying to get back to sleep. We told my dad first thing in the morning when he called to check in, but I remember him not believing us. He thought it had to be a dream or something. That kind of thing didn't happen in our small town in Ohio. But the next day, there was an article in the local newspaper about a lamb being slain on a makeshift altar on the east side of town. My dad stopped doubting us, and my mom and I got even more freaked out. My parents still live in that house, and we have never seen any other cult-like behavior in the area. But that one evening freaked us out enough that I decided to permanently sleep over in my parents' bedroom every time my dad left town